Hi everyone, welcome back to our law sessions with Kaso Balugu. So today we are going to look at another concept in law which we call the rule of law. But before we go any further, I'd like to remind each one of us to subscribe, like and share. There we shall cooperate and everything shall be available to you. So now, when we talk about the rule of law, we mainly mean that everything in government should be done in accordance with the law. There is one person who is said to be the founding father of the rule of law. That is Professor Dicey. So Professor Dicey wrote about 3 elements and said, if those elements are realistic and being observed, then the rule of law shall be said to be existent in the nation. Number 1 was that there should be absolute dominance and supremacy of the regular law as opposed to the arbitrary exercise of individual powers. For this was meaning that instead of individual powers prevailing in a nation, there should be law that govern the people so that there may not be instances of people ruling in accordance to their personal interests. And number 2, according to Professor Dicey, was that there should be equality before the law. And there he meant that every individual in a nation should be treated equally before the law, not discriminating people because of their social, cultural, religious, and other differences. And number 3, he said, the law should be an instrument of a just government. And when he said the law should be an instrument of a just government, he meant that that government which is not built on justice is a clear violation of the rule of law. So any country which exercises a justice, it shall be said to be observing the rule of law. It is also important to note that there was the ICJ, the one we call the International Coalition of Jurists, which sat in Geneva. They also came up with 10 principles and said any nation that shall observe those 10 principles shall be said to be observing the rule of law. And one of those 10 principles was that there should be a strong government. And when they talked about the strong government, they majorly mean that this government should be established in a way that people are obedient to their leaders without necessarily forcing them. So when people are obedient, voluntarily submitting to their leaders, then such a country shall be said to be observing the rule of law. So secondly, according to the ICJ, was that the actions of the government, that is to say actions of the 3 arms of the government, should be conditioned and backed by the law. By this they meant that whatever the government does, the law should be above. And secondly, it meant that the government is the custodian of the law. So it should rule people, or it should make laws that aim at the public interests. And therefore, they went ahead and more explanation is that the executive and the legislature are the 2 arms which work hand in hand to ensure that they bring up the law that is going to govern the state. And then their law should be in a way that it is going to be in the public interests. And then if these arms of the government fail to come up with the law that is going to bring up public interest, then the judiciary will come in and then correct on the excesses of these 2 arms of the government which work together to come up with the laws. And then thirdly, according to the ICJ, was equality before the law. When they talked about equality before the law, they meant that the law should be consistent in its application. The way it was applied yesterday, it should be the same way it is going to apply to someone today. There should not be differences, maybe basing on the differences among individuals. People should be treated equally before the law. And then the other principle was the independence of the judiciary. When they talked about independence of the judiciary, they meant that the judiciary should be independent in its decision making. no other arm of the government should come up and then influence the decisions of the judiciary. And the other explanation would be that the other two arms of the government should uphold the decisions made by the judiciary, not interfering with its functions. Then the other principle was enforcement of the human rights. When they talked about enforcement of the human rights, they didn't just mean that these human rights should be written down in the laws. They meant that these rights should be seen clearly, clearly practical on ground. They meant that the rights of individuals should be seen in the nation, not just having them written under their laws, but without having any impact among the citizens. So the ICJ also went ahead with and came up with another principle and said there should be representative government. When they talked about representative government, they meant that there should be a government where people will be inclusive and represented either directly or indirectly. And this one we see it practical in the case in the case of Uganda, whereby Article 1 says the power shall belong to the people, and the people shall be ruled in accordance to their will. They shall have the right to elect their leaders. And that is read together with Article 59, shows that people shall have to elect their leaders, and then the government shall accord all that is necessary to ensure that people register and then start electing their leaders. And then we also see it in this scenario where the government requires every constituency to elect its member of parliament. So that one becomes a representative government. Then the other principle according to the ICJ was that there should be a fair process in judicial adjudication, and this fair process should be based on the principles of natural justice. And this is seen under Article 28 of the Ugandan Constitution, which says there should be a fair hearing before someone is tried. There should be a fair hearing. And then together with Article 126, which says justice should be availed to the people without any regard to technicalities. That one majorly talks about fair process in judicial adjudication. Then they also came up with another principle that was there should be a fair and effective system of administrative law, and by this they meant that administrative authorities should be also backed and sanctioned by the law. Every act they do should also be in accordance with the requirement of the law, not just doing the acts without making reference to the law. And in case they do anything outside the law, then action can be taken against them. So the other principle according to the ICJ was that there should be respect for international law. When they talked about respect for international law, the rationale was that economies or states relate to each other, and therefore that state which observes and respects international law shall be said to be observing the rule of law, rather than that state which works on its own without making any reference to the international law. Then lastly, according to the ICJ, was that there should be a socio-economic well-being of the people, and by this they meant that socially people should be well in their country, and then economically they should also be okay, not allowing the rich to grow rich at the expense of the poor. So people should have that socio-economic well-being or equality as they enjoy the life in their economy. So basically that is the rule of law, which majorly means everything should be done in accordance with the law. And then Professor Dicey being the founding father, and later on the ICJ, which is the International Coalition of Jurists, which sat in Geneva and came up with those 10 principles. So it is important to know these 10 principles, appreciate them, come to understand them. If you come to understand those 10 principles, and then you also understand the 3 elements laid down by Professor Dicey, then you shall be good to go under this concept of the rule of law. I remain Kasobaluku. just request you to subscribe, like, and then share my videos. We shall always be there. We shall interact. For any inquiries, you can always reach out to me.